The wind howled through the trees as we trudged deeper into the woods, the sky darkening with every step. The hike had started out as an adventure, just a group of friends trying to escape the chaos of the city for a weekend of camping. But the storm clouds gathering above us had different plans. Shouldn't be too far now, I muttered, half to myself and half to the others. The map was worn and barely legible, but it showed a clearing somewhere nearby. Somewhere we could set up camp, maybe even light a fire if we were lucky. But with the storm pressing in, it didn't look promising. Then we saw it, just beyond the trees, nestled in the clearing like a forgotten relic, was a cabin. It was old, that much was clear. The wood was rotting in places. The windows were either cracked or covered in grime, and the door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. But it was shelter, and with the storm fast approaching, none of us hesitated. "Looks abandoned," someone said, their voice barely audible over the wind. We all nodded in agreement, though none of us voiced what we were really thinking. Asterisk. Who abandoned it, and why? Asterisk. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of decay. The furniture, what little there was old, covered in a layer of dirt that suggested no one had been here for years. But it would keep us dry, and that was all that mattered. We made a fire in the crumbling fireplace, its flickering light casting long shadows across the room. As we settled in, the first drops of rain began to fall, soon turning into a torrent that hammered against the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer with each passing minute. We tried to relax, chatting quietly, but the cabin's oppressive atmosphere weighed on us. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer, darker. Then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind. A low, breathy sound, like someone speaking just out of earshot. But as the night wore on, it became clear that the whispers were coming from inside the cabin, from the walls. I exchanged glances with the others, trying to gauge if they were hearing it too. They were. Then there were the figures, dark shapes that seemed to dart just out of sight. Every time I turned my head, I caught the flicker of movement in the corners of my vision. But when I focused, there was nothing there, just shadows. Or so I tried to convince myself. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually caught up with us. I drifted off, but the moment my eyes closed, the dreams began. I found myself standing in front of the cabin, alone in the clearing. The storm raged around me, but there was no sound, just silence. The door creaked open, wider and wider, and something moved inside. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it watching me. Waiting. I tried to move, but my feet were rooted to the ground. The shadow inside the cabin grew, stretching toward me. And then, just before it reached me, I woke up with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat. The others were awake too, sitting up and staring into the fire, their faces pale. No one said anything, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They had the same dream. We all did. That's when we knew we had made a mistake coming here. The cabin wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed. Something was inside with us and it didn't want us to leave. We decided to make a break for it at dawn, but when morning came, the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard we pulled, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the cabin itself had trapped us inside. Panic set in. We tried the windows, but they wouldn't open either. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. And that's when we realized we weren't alone. Something was here with us. Something ancient. Something evil. We were trapped. The panic was suffocating. We tore at the door, banging our fists against the wood until they bled, but it refused to move. The windows, once cracked and fragile looking, now seemed impenetrable, as though something far stronger than glass kept us inside. Desperation clawed at us, filling the air with a frantic energy that only seemed to feed whatever malevolent presence lurked in the cabin. The whispers became louder, more distinct. This time, they weren't just sounds. They were words, low, insidious mutterings that slithered into our minds. They spoke of suffering, of pain, of things that happened here long before we ever set foot inside. My skin crawled as the voices grew closer, as though they were right behind me, breathing on the back of my neck. "We need to stick together," someone said, their voice trembling. We all agreed, gathering near the fire that had almost burned out, its light now weak and flickering. But there was no comfort in numbers, not in this place. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse, as if they were alive. They stretched and twisted unnaturally, taking on vague forms that shifted whenever we tried to focus on them. I could feel eyes on me, dozens of eyes, watching, waiting for the right moment. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside made my heart race with terror. It wasn't long before the first of us snapped. He bolted for the door, shouting that he would break it down. But before he could even touch the handle, something lashed out from the darkness. It happened so fast, too fast to process. One moment he was running and the next he was gone, yanked into the shadows with a sickening crunch. We screamed, backing away from the spot where he had vanished. But there was nothing there. No blood, no sign of him at all. It was as if the cabin had swallowed him whole. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down I knew this was no ordinary place. We had stumbled into something far worse than we could have imagined. The storm outside raged on, thunder crashing so loudly it shook the cabin, but it felt distant now. The real storm was inside, and we were caught in the center of it. There was no escape, no way out. The hours dragged on, each one more torturous than the last. We huddled together, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, flinching at every sound. The whispers had become a constant hum, gnawing at our sanity. Sleep was impossible, but exhaustion weighed on us like a heavy blanket, making it harder and harder to stay alert. Then came the dreams. No longer confined to sleep, they invaded our waking moments, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Horrific visions played out before our eyes, bodies twisted in agony, faces contorted in silent screams, blood splattered across the walls. Each of us saw the same things, felt the same terror, as though the cabin was trying to force us to share in its cursed memories. And then, in the midst of it all, I saw her. At first, she was just a figure in the distance, barely visible in the dim light of the dying fire. But as she drew closer, the details became clearer. She was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Her hair hung in matted tangles, and her tattered dress clung to her emaciated frame, as if it had been wet for far too long. She moved slowly, almost gliding across the floor. And though her eyes were empty, I could feel them fixed on me, on all of us. A shiver ran down my spine as she stopped a few feet away, her mouth opening as if to speak. But no words came out. Just a low, guttural sound that sent waves of nausea rolling through me. The others heard it too. I could see their faces contort in horror. It was a sound that didn't belong to anything human. Suddenly she lunged, not at me but at the one closest to her. She moved impossibly fast, her pale hands closing around their throat. There was no struggle, no time for one. She squeezed, and with a sickening pop, it was over. She vanished as quickly as she had appeared, leaving us standing in stunned silence. The body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. We were trapped in a nightmare, and whatever was in this cabin with us wasn't going to stop until it had claimed us all. In the corner of the room, the shadows moved again. And this time I could see them clearly. They weren't just shadows, they were figures. Twisted, grotesque figures, half-formed and writhing in the darkness. And they were getting closer. Something told me that the cabin wasn't just cursed. It was hungry, and we were its next meal. The cabin was no longer just a place. It was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. The air was thick with dread, pressing down on us like a weight we couldn't escape. Every creak, every whisper, every flicker of the dying fire chipped away at our sanity. We had to get out, but deep down we all knew there was no leaving. Not really. The shadows in the corners of the room continued to shift, taking on shapes that defied explanation. Twisted limbs, faces half-formed and frozen in expressions of pain. I couldn't tear my eyes away from them, even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. But it didn't matter. The cabin wanted us to see. It wanted us to witness its horrors, to feel the terror it fed on. We tried one last time to break down the door, to shatter the windows, but the cabin had us now. The walls groaned, closing in as if they were alive, breathing, hungry. The whispers became voices, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony of agony and despair. I could hear them clearly now, words forming in the darkness around us. Stay with us forever. Then, from the darkness, the woman appeared again. This time, she wasn't alone. More figures emerged behind her, all of them as pale and ghostly as she was, their hollow eyes fixed on us. Their mouths moved in unison, repeating the same words over and over, a chorus of death. Stay with us. Panic surged through me as the room grew colder, the breath of the dead brushing against my skin. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. They were closing in, their movements slow and deliberate, savoring our fear. Then, suddenly, the fire roared to life, casting a harsh light across the room. The figures stopped, retreating slightly, their faces contorted in something that resembled fear. It was the first sign of weakness we had seen from them. Desperate, we grabbed anything we could. Broken pieces of wood, burning logs from the fire, anything that could keep them at bay. But just as we thought we had a chance, just as the flames seemed to push them back, something shifted in the air. The cabin trembled, a deep rumble vibrating through the floorboards. The ground beneath us cracked open with a deafening roar. We stumbled, struggling to keep our balance, but it was no use. The floor gave way beneath one of us, and with a scream, they were swallowed by the darkness below. We scrambled back, avoiding the widening fissure in the floor. But then I saw it, the real horror of this place. Below the cabin, in the pit that had opened up beneath our feet, were bodies. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Pale, twisted bodies piled on top of each other, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal torment. The woman, the figures, they weren't ghosts. They were the remains of those who had come before us. Those who had tried to escape but had failed. And now they were part of the cabin. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, and I could hear the truth in them. This place was a trap, a cursed living entity that lured people in and consumed them, their souls feeding the darkness within. The cabin had been doing this for centuries, and we were just the latest in a long line of victims. But there was something else, something far worse. From the pit below, a new figure began to rise. It was larger than the others, grotesque and malformed, a mass of twisted limbs and gnashing teeth. It crawled out of the darkness, dragging itself up toward us, and I realized with a sickening dread that this was the source of it all. The heart of the cabin. The others screamed as it emerged fully into the room, its bloated form pulsing with an unnatural life. It reached for us with long, spindly arms, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth. We fought, desperately swinging our makeshift weapons, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, too relentless. One by one it took them, dragging them down into the pit, their screams echoing in the darkness. I was the last one left, standing on the edge of the pit, the creature looming over me. I knew there was no escape, no way out. The cabin had won, but just as the creature reached for me, just as its cold, rotting hand closed around my wrist, I saw something. A flicker of movement in the corner of the room, a shadow that wasn't like the others. It was darker, more defined, and it was watching me. I realized then, in a moment of horrifying clarity, that the cabin wasn't just feeding on us, it was toying with us. It had let me see this, let me understand the truth, because it wanted me to suffer, to know that there was nothing I could do. And then it hit me, the final terrible twist, the reason why no one ever escaped this place. The cabin didn't just trap bodies, it trapped souls, and once you were part of it, you never left. The creature's grip tightened, pulling me toward the pit. But even as I was dragged down into the darkness, even as the cold, suffocating blackness closed in around me, I could still see the cabin, still hear the whispers, and I knew that soon, I would be one of them.